You got fat, her ex mocked her, unaware she was pregnant with the Mafia boss's son. The air in the kingdom was thick with the scent of rain, the kind that felt as if it had been waiting to fall for years. Elara stepped onto the stone path leading to the gates of the mansion, the familiar sight of the looming fortress making her heart race. She had returned. After so many years, the weight of the past had finally drawn her back to the place where everything had begun and ended. The kingdom, once vibrant and alive with hope, had now darkened under the rule of its Mafia family. Its streets whispered of secrets and old sins. The Mafia's reach stretched beyond the underworld, into every corner of the kingdom, controlling trade, politics, and even the lives of the people who lived there. Elara had once been part of that world, and she had once been in love with the man who now ruled it all, the prince-turned-Mafia boss, Damien. Her steps were steady as she moved closer to the gates, her hands resting lightly on her swollen belly. Inside her the child stirred, a reminder of the reason she had returned. Her son, the heir to Damien's empire, was still unborn but already a symbol of a power that neither of them fully understood. She had left this place years ago, her heart broken by the cruelty of a man who had once promised her everything. The last words he had spoken to her still echoed in her ears, words that had shattered her confidence and crushed the dreams they had once shared. You got fat. You're no longer the woman I loved. Those words, mocking and cruel, had driven her away. But now, the child growing inside her, the child she had kept a secret for so long, was all that mattered. And she would make Damien see the consequences of his actions, the price of his betrayal. As she reached the gates, a figure emerged from the shadows, a woman, tall and shrouded in a dark cloak, her eyes glinting with a mysterious light. She was not a servant, nor one of Damien's usual associates. There was something strange about her, something ancient. You must be Elara, the woman said, her voice low and smooth like honey. The one who carries the child that will change everything. Elara didn't flinch, though the woman's words caused a cold shiver to run down her spine. She had heard rumors, whispers of a prophecy about a child who would either bring peace to the kingdom or tear it apart. A child born of the Mafia's bloodline, but not necessarily one of its future rulers.
I'm here for Damien, Elara replied, her voice steady but with an edge of determination.
And nothing else. The woman studied her for a long moment, her gaze intense. Then, with a slight nod, she gestured for Elara to follow. The boss is expecting you. But know this, what you bring with you is more than just a child. It's a curse, a gift, and a test all in one. Elara felt a sudden weight settle on her shoulders, but she didn't allow the fear to take root. She was beyond fear now. All that mattered was confronting Damien, showing him that she had moved on, and that she was not the same fragile girl he had once mocked. She had grown stronger not just in body but in spirit. The woman led her through the mansion's grand hall, its walls lined with ancient tapestries and gold-framed portraits of long-dead ancestors. The building felt alive with the echoes of the past, each step she took on the cold marble floors seeming to carry the weight of history. But none of the memories here mattered. Not the grandiose mansion, not the wealth, not the power. What mattered now was the child she carried and the man who had broken her heart. As they reached the inner chambers, the door to the study opened. There, sitting at a large wooden desk, was Damien. He hadn't changed much. His dark hair, now longer, framed his face in the same way it had years ago. His sharp jawline, his piercing eyes, the way he carried himself, all of it was familiar, but it no longer made her heart flutter. Instead, it filled her with a quiet rage, a rage that had burned slowly inside her for all these years. He looked up as she entered, his eyes narrowing slightly. For a moment, he simply stared at her, as if unsure of what he was seeing. "Elara," he said, his voice a mix of disbelief and curiosity. "You've returned." "I have," she replied, her tone cold and deliberate. "And I didn't come back for you.
I came back for my son." At the mention of the child, Damien's gaze flickered.
For the first time since she had entered, something in his expression shifted. a hint of surprise, followed by something else that Alara couldn't quite place. "You're pregnant?" he asked, his voice softening ever so slightly. "Yes," she said, her hand resting protectively on her belly. "And it's yours." A long silence stretched between them. Damien leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping against the surface of the desk, though his eyes never left her. There was something in his gaze now, something not quite anger, but rather a strange mixture of guilt and hesitation. "How far along are you?" he asked after a moment. "Far enough that it's not a mistake," she replied sharply. "And far enough that I'm not going to let you forget what you did." The words stung, but Damien's face remained unreadable. For a moment, Alara thought he might speak, but instead he simply nodded, his expression hardening again. His mask of indifference was back in place. "You didn't come here for an apology," he said, his tone businesslike. "So what is it that you want from me, Alara?" "What I want," she said, her voice steady but filled with the weight of years of unresolved pain, "is for you to realize that the child you fathered is more than just an heir to your empire. He's the key to something far greater. And whether you like it or not, he's yours to protect." Damien stood suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "What do you mean by that?" His voice was low, dangerous now, as if the calm mask had slipped just enough to reveal the Mafia boss beneath. "I mean that he will change everything," she said, her voice unwavering. "I don't know how yet, but I intend to find out. And I'm not going to let you keep running from what you've done." Damien's expression hardened again, and for a moment Alara thought he might turn away from her, like he had so many years ago. But instead, his eyes locked onto hers with a fire she had not seen before. The old Damien, the one she had once loved, the one who had broken her, was still there, lurking beneath the surface. "We'll see, won't we?" he muttered, more to himself than to her. "We'll see how this plays out, Alara." But as he turned away, the slightest tremor in his hand betrayed him. Alara noticed it, but she didn't say anything. There was power in silence, and she knew the storm was far from over. The sun hung low over the kingdom, casting long shadows across the mansion's grand courtyard. The air felt heavy, as if the very land itself was waiting for something, waiting for Alara's child to arrive, or perhaps for the prophecy to unfold. She didn't know what was coming, but she could feel the weight of it in her bones.
Damien hadn't spoken much since their confrontation the day before.
He'd barely looked at her, as if the presence of the child growing inside her made everything too real. Yet, in the quiet moments when they were alone, she could sense something in him, a hesitation, a pull towards her that he couldn't deny. But pride and power ran deep within him, and it was clear that he had no intention of allowing anyone, least of all her. Alara stood before the great fireplace in her room, staring into the flames. The mansion felt cold now, its grand walls unable to hide the tension that lingered between her and Damien. The walls had once echoed with laughter, love, and promises of forever, but those days were gone. She had come back for a reason, but now, as the days stretched on, she was uncertain of her next move. It wasn't just her child that tied her to this place. It was the kingdom, the dark forces at work within the Mafia empire, and the curse that hovered over Damien's bloodline. The whispers were everywhere now, like a song she couldn't escape. A prophecy, told by the ancient seers, spoke of a child born of the Mafia's blood, a child who could break the empire's chain of power or destroy it entirely. There was little time, and Alara had little choice but to work with Damien, the man who had once torn her heart into pieces. But as the days passed, something changed within her. She saw not just the man who had abandoned her, but the man who had been shaped by the very darkness he controlled. And yet, despite the power that surrounded him, despite the walls he built around his emotions, she couldn't help but wonder if there was more to him than the ruthless leader of the Mafia. The door to her room creaked open, and Damien stepped inside. His presence was unmistakable. His tall frame filled the doorway, his eyes hard as ever, but there was something in them now that spoke of doubt. Perhaps it was the curse, or the child, but whatever it was, he seemed different, more conflicted. Alara turned, her eyes meeting his for the first time since their last conversation. "Why did you come back?" he asked, his voice low, his tone holding an edge she couldn't quite place. He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed over his chest, waiting for an answer. "To protect my son," she said simply, her voice steady. "And to make sure you don't ruin everything." Damien's lips twisted into a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ruin everything? I've built this empire from the ground up. I don't ruin things. I make them stronger." Elara took a step closer, her gaze unwavering. "You don't understand. You've made so many enemies, Damien. And your empire, it's built on blood, on promises broken. And now, because of you, your own bloodline will either redeem you, or it will be the end of everything you've worked for."
His eyes narrowed, and for a moment Elara saw the man he used to be.
The one who had laughed with her under the moonlight, the one who had kissed her as though she were the only woman in the world. That man was still there, beneath the surface, but the Mafia boss, the man who ruled with an iron fist, had buried him long ago. "I don't believe in prophecies," he said, his voice colder now. "I believe in power, and I'll protect my son the only way I know how. I'll raise him to be strong, to rule, and nothing will stand in our way." Elara's heart ached at his words. It wasn't just the power he craved. It was control. He was afraid of losing it. But she knew, deep down, that there was more to him than this. She just had to find a way to reach it. "The prophecy says your son will either bring peace or destruction," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But you have to be willing to let go of your need for control. You have to trust that love, real love, can change everything." Damien's expression shifted just for a moment, as if something inside him was stirred. But then, just as quickly, he closed himself off again, his features hardening. "You think I don't know what love is?" he asked, his tone sharp. "I loved you once, Elara, and look where that got me." Her breath caught in her throat at his words. She had expected anger, perhaps even bitterness, but hearing him speak of love so coldly, like a memory to be erased, hurt more than she could have imagined. "I didn't come back for your love, Damien," she said, her voice strong. "I came back to protect our child, and to protect this kingdom from the consequences of your choices." The silence between them stretched, the weight of their words hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. Finally, Damien spoke, his voice quieter this time. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect my son," he said, his gaze softening. "But I won't be told how to rule." Elara met his eyes, her heart heavy. "Then you'll lose him, and you'll lose everything you've built." "You can't keep ruling through fear, Damien." "You can't control everything with your power. That's the curse that's been passed down through your bloodline." Damien shook his head, frustration crossing his face. "I don't believe in curses," he muttered. "I believe in what I can build with my own hands." Elara stepped forward, her voice steady but full of conviction. "The curse isn't just some story, Damien. It's real. It's been binding your family for generations, and now your son is the one who will either break it or make it worse. You have a choice. You can choose to let go of the power you've clung to, or you can watch everything crumble." For a long moment, Damien said nothing. His expression was unreadable, his face as cold as the stone walls around them. But then, just as Elara thought he would turn away, he spoke again. "I'm not afraid of losing control," he said, his voice firm. "But I will protect my son. And if that means making a change, then I'll do it. But not because of some prophecy. I'll do it because he's mine. And I'll be damned if I let anyone take him from me." Elara's heart raced. There was something in his words, something that felt different. She wasn't sure if he truly understood, or if he was simply trying to convince himself. But for the first time there was a spark of hope. Damien was still the man she had loved. He just needed to believe that he could be better, that he could change.
I'm glad to hear that, she said softly.
"But words aren't enough, Damien. You'll need to show it." "Actions speak louder than any promises you can make." He nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then I'll prove it to you. But it's not just my son I'm fighting for now. It's the future of this kingdom." And with that,
Ilara knew that the battle had only just begun.
The days in the mansion had grown longer, the silence between Alara and Damien heavier. It was as though the very air in the kingdom had shifted, and no one was quite sure which direction it would blow next. The once familiar halls now seemed colder, as if the walls themselves could feel the weight of the prophecy that lingered over them all. Alara had returned, and with her the future of the Mafia empire was in question. Damien had promised her that he would protect their child, but Alara knew words meant little in the world he ruled. His empire had been built on power, fear, and control, and she was beginning to realize that changing it, changing him, would not be as simple as making promises. She had underestimated the darkness that held him captive, the grip of his own pride and ambition. Still, she had to try, for their son, for the kingdom, and, perhaps, for the man who had once loved her, even if that love now felt like a distant memory, something she could barely grasp. She spent most of her days in her room, the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The child she carried was not just the heir to the Mafia's empire. He was the key to something far greater, something beyond her understanding. But there were forces at play that neither she nor Damien fully understood. As much as she wanted to believe in the promise of redemption, the growing shadows outside the mansion's walls reminded her that the curse was real, and that it had already begun to unravel. The whispers in the kingdom were growing louder. The Mafia's enemies had sensed weakness, and Ilara could feel the tension building, like a storm on the horizon. No one was safe, not her, not Damien, and certainly not their child. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, Ilara sat by the window, gazing out at the sprawling gardens. The cool breeze carried the scent of jasmine, but there was an edge to it now, a bitterness that lingered in the air. Footsteps echoed behind her, and she didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The air around her grew heavy, and she felt Damien's presence like a shadow at her back. "Ilara," he said quietly, his voice low but filled with something she couldn't quite place. "We need to talk." She stood up, turning to face him. The look in his eyes was different now. Not angry, not cold, but something else, something softer, though he would never admit it. "What is it, Damien?" she asked, her voice steady. He hesitated for a moment, as if unsure how to begin. Then, his gaze softened just enough for her to see the weight he carried. "You were right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The curse is real. It's already begun." Alara's heart skipped a beat. She had hoped he would come to this conclusion on his own, but hearing the words from him still sent a ripple of fear through her. "I've been feeling it," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "The power inside me, inside my family. It's not just power, it's corruption, and I've been feeding it for years." Ilara's heart ached as she looked at him. The man before her was not the ruthless Mafia boss he portrayed to the world. He was a man lost in the very system he had created, trapped by his own need for control.
"It's not too late to change, Damien," she said softly, taking a step toward him. "You don't have to be what your family was."
"You can break the curse." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers for something, for any sign of the woman he had once known. "I don't know how," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I've spent my whole life building this empire. It's all I've known. How can I just walk away from it?"
You don't have to walk away, Alara replied, her voice steady.
"But you have to let go of the control. You have to trust in something bigger than power. You have to trust in love." Damien shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Love? After everything that's happened between us? You want me to trust in that?" Ilara reached out, her fingers brushing his.
I know it's hard, but I'm not asking you to trust in me.
"I'm asking you to trust in our son. He's the one who can break this curse. But you have to believe in him. You have to believe that he can change everything." For a long moment Damien stood there, his hand resting by his side, as though he was afraid to reach out. Finally he took a deep breath and turned away from her, his back to her. "I don't know if I can believe in that," he said, his voice heavy with doubt. "But I'll try, for him." Elara felt a flicker of hope rise in her chest. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She couldn't change him all at once, but she could help him take the first step, and that was all she could do. As Damien walked away, his steps echoing in the silence, Elara stood by the window, watching him disappear into the shadows. A part of her wanted to call out to him, to stop him, but she knew that this was something he had to do on his own. The journey ahead would be difficult, but it was the only path left. And no matter how dark things got, no matter how much pain they both had to endure, Elara knew that they would have to face it together. Cliffhanger. That night, as Elara lay in bed, her thoughts swirling with doubt and hope, she heard the sound of footsteps outside her door. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Elara!" a voice called, familiar and filled with urgency. "You need to see this." She rose quickly, her heart racing. When she opened the door, the mysterious woman from before stood in the hallway, her eyes wide with fear. "It started," the woman whispered. "The curse has begun to unravel, and now your son is in danger." Elara's breath caught in her throat. "What do you mean?" "The child is not just a key to breaking the curse," the woman said, her voice shaking. "He is the trigger, and the prophecy is already in motion. If you don't act quickly, everything will be lost." Elara's mind raced as she followed the woman down the dark hallway. What was happening? And how could they stop it before it was too late? The storm that had been building for weeks finally broke, and the kingdom was bathed in an eerie, unnatural quiet. Elara stood by the window, her eyes scanning the dark sky as the wind howled outside, rattling the windows of the mansion. It was as if the world itself had paused, waiting for the final piece of the prophecy to fall into place. The curse that had haunted Damien's bloodline for generations was now at its peak, and her son, the child she carried, was at the heart of it all. Elara's mind was filled with fear and determination. She had spent months trying to make sense of the prophecy, the words of the seer, and the mystery that surrounded her son's future. But now, it was clear. They were running out of time. The darkness that had consumed Damien's family was closing in on them, and the only way to break the curse was for him to face his past, to let go of the control that had defined his life. The child, her son, was not just the heir to the Mafia empire. He was the key to something greater, a power beyond anyone's understanding. And if Damien couldn't change, if he couldn't break the cycle of violence and fear, the prophecy would come true. Their son would either save the kingdom or destroy it. "Elara?" The voice startled her, and she turned to find Damien standing in the doorway. His eyes were filled with uncertainty, a shadow of the man he had been. But there was something different about him now. Something softer. Something she hadn't seen in years. "What is it?" she asked, her voice steady, though her heart raced in her chest. "I don't know what to do," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "I've spent my entire life trying to control everything. My empire. My family. You, and now, our son. But it's never enough. I thought power was everything, but I was wrong." Elara's heart clenched as she stepped toward him. The man before her was no longer the cold, calculating Mafia boss she had once known. He was a man who had been torn apart by his own choices, and now he was looking for redemption. "You don't have to control everything, Damien," she said gently. "You've been running from the truth for so long. You've built this empire on fear. But it's not too late to change. You don't have to be the man you were. You can be better." He looked at her, his eyes searching hers, and for a moment she saw the man she had once loved, the man who had held her in his arms and promised her the world. That man was still inside him, buried beneath the walls of the empire he had built. But now, Elara could see the cracks beginning to form, and maybe, just maybe, he was ready to face what he had been running from. He whispered, his voice trembling. "I've made so many mistakes. I've hurt so many people. I've hurt you. And now I'm about to lose everything I've ever cared about." Elara placed her hand on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "You haven't lost everything yet. But you have to make a choice, Damien. The curse won't be broken by power or control. It will be broken by love. Love for our son. Love for this kingdom. And love for yourself. The words hung in the air between them, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Damien's eyes were fixed on hers, and Alara could feel the weight of his gaze. She knew what he was thinking. He was torn between the man he had been and the man he could become, but there was no turning back now. The time for change had come. "I'm scared," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to let go." Alara's heart broke for him. She could see the fear in his eyes, the fear of losing control, of losing the empire he had worked so hard to build. But she also saw something else, the desire to be better, to be the man she had always known he could be.
You don't have to do it alone, she said softly.
"We'll face this together. You don't have to control everything. You just have to trust in us, trust in our son." Damien took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging as if a weight had been lifted from him. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel something other than fear and anger. He allowed himself to feel the love that had been buried inside him for so long.
Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion.
"I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'll do whatever it takes to protect you and our son." Alara smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You're already doing it, Damien, by letting go, by choosing to be better." Suddenly, a loud knock at the door interrupted their moment. Alara turned to see the mysterious woman who had warned her about the curse standing in the doorway, her face grim. "Elara, Damien," the woman said urgently. "It's time. The prophecy is unfolding. The curse is not just a matter of bloodline. It's a matter of choice. Your son must make the final decision. And the kingdom is waiting." Alara felt a chill run down her spine. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. The moment when everything would change. She turned to Damien, her hand still on his chest. "Are you ready?" He nodded, his face determined. "I'm ready." Together they walked toward the door, leaving the safety of the mansion behind. The storm that had been brewing for so long was finally here, and Alara knew that the fate of the kingdom and the future of her son would be decided in the next few hours. As they made their way through the darkened streets, Alara could feel the weight of the world pressing down on her. The prophecy was real. Her son was the key to breaking the curse, but it was up to him to choose his path. Would he choose to bring peace to the kingdom, or would he follow in his father's footsteps and destroy everything they had fought for? They reached the center of the kingdom, where a great stone altar stood. The air was thick with tension, and the shadows seemed to stretch farther than they should have. Alara could see the people gathered around, their eyes filled with fear and anticipation. Damien stepped forward, his presence commanding and powerful. But as he looked at Alara, his expression softened. This was not about power anymore. This was about redemption. "Your son is the key," the mysterious woman said, her voice low. "The prophecy is clear. He must choose. He must choose between the darkness of his bloodline and the light of a new future." Alara felt her heart race as she looked at Damien. This was the moment they had both been waiting for, the moment when their son would decide the fate of the kingdom. And then she felt a soft stir in her belly. The child, her son, was ready. The time had come.